when someone's late a lot and we expect them to be late, we do expect them to eventually show up. And if we can trust that, how much more can we trust God, who's always on time?
Welcome to this episode of The French Press. Let me pour you a cup of coffee while we talk about intrigues of faith, pages we've dog-eared, and the life in between on The French Press.
Welcome back to this episode of The French Press, where we talk about books I'm reading, intrigues of faith, and the life in between. I'm so excited you're joining me today. If you are an avid reader and maybe you're reading a lot of the books we're talking about, I love that. You guys have been sending me pictures and telling me you're reading the books, and I take a lot of joy in hearing that. But also, if you're like, I don't have time to read and I'm not going to read, this is still a great podcast for you because you can hear all about the books and you don't have to read them. I'll read them for you. So wherever you're at, I'm so glad you're joining me. Now, last time I sort of left off in the middle of a chapter of a book, and I said I'm going to pick up where I left off. I actually wrote it down in the book because you know I love to mark up books. So I wrote down right where I left off so I could pick up. So if you want to hear the first part, go back an episode. I think it's called Too Many Travel Mugs. But you don't need to. This will stand alone. But if you want to kind of hear the beginning of this chapter, go ahead and go back and listen to that one. But the book I left off in is called Ask Me Anything, Lord by Heather C. King. This is a book I pulled out of the little free library, and I am just so shocked by how much I love it. I really kind of picked it up thinking it would be really light. You know, don't judge a book by a cover, like they say. And I did. I judged it. It looked like it would kind of be a lighter book, and it's not at all. It's actually very deep and very thoughtful. And I find myself talking about it and thinking about it quite a bit. And so I think we had left, this section is called, you know, kind of, Am I my brother's keeper? And I believe we had talked about Cain saying to God, you know, am I my brother's keeper? And the answer being, shockingly to him, yes, you are. And I find myself referencing this a lot in life lately, just thinking where you maybe want to turn a blind eye or not be, you know, like, oh, who cares? You know, do whatever. We are actually called to serve others and to help others and to sometimes say hard things to others, but also to be forgiving and loving. And we are our brother's keepers and in so many ways. And I find myself thinking about that a lot. In the next part of this chapter, which is where I left off, and I'm going to just pick right up there, takes place at the Last Supper. So they're at the Passover, and Jesus, they're sitting down and they're eating, they're laughing probably, and they're breaking bread and enjoying a meal and having a nice time together. And then, you know, Jesus kind of breaks up the fun time everybody's having with kind of a hard question or a hard statement. She says, this is also the kind of self-examination that the 12 disciples performed at the Last Supper. They ate, laughed, sang hymns and worship. Sitting at the table, they were jovial, anticipatory, and looking forward to Christ's triumph in Jerusalem. Then Jesus leaned in and said, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. Well, that's a real mood killer. I mean, you're having a good time at a party, and then all of a sudden, like, the host says, one of you will betray me. I mean, it feels like something out of like a mafia movie. You know, you're like, oh, what's happening here? I think the story becomes, we've heard it so many times that we maybe lose some of the drama of what's happening here, how probably taken aback the disciples were by this statement. And so she says, suddenly the mood shifts to silence, stillness, seriousness. She says here, if Jesus said this in a church service, many of us would nudge our neighbor and make efforts not to stare at the person that we think he's talking to across the room. And we might think, oh, it's you, or you should hear this. How many times have we, you know, sat in church or listened to a podcast and thought, oh, I know someone who needs to hear this. And we often tend to think that way. But yet the disciples didn't do that. Their reaction was to turn inward. It says the disciples, though, looked inward, doing what God had urged Cain to do. Greatly distressed, each one asked in turn, "Am I the one, Lord?" This is found in Matthew 26. So they're asking, "Is it me, God?" Instead of saying, "Oh, it's probably that guy, or it's probably this person," or, "Yep, you're talking to, my spouse, or you're talking to my coworker, or you're talking to that person." They instead turned inward and began to examine their hearts right away. It's a dangerous question. We've talked about dangerous prayers in this book particularly. She talked about David praying dangerous prayers, asking the Lord to search his heart. And now here the disciples are asking a dangerous question. Is it me, God? Am I the one that will betray you? Am I the one that's like this? How often do we do that when we hear a message or we read the Bible or we're convicted in some way? How often do we stop and say, am I the problem here? Or am I the one doing this? Or, it takes two people, to be in a fight or to be upset with each other. How much am I contributing to this? And they were willing to do that. It says, Peter sat at the Passover table and with the others asked the dangerous question, "Am I the one, Lord?" He allowed the searching of his heart, and it wasn't him. 11 of those at the table endured their souls being turned over and could say that they were innocent of this betrayal. So in this particular setting, Peter and 11 of the disciples were innocent of this betrayal. They asked the question and Jesus said, "Nope, this isn't in you." But the trouble is, as she goes on to talk about, is that they stopped asking that question. And it's really a question we can never stop asking ourselves. We have to always be examining our heart. We're always asking God to create a clean heart in us, to search our heart, to get the junk out, because we are sinful and we sin daily, and we need to daily ask the Lord, check our hearts. Am I letting a sin grow? Am I letting something become bigger? Am I justifying what I'm doing and not really examining it? And Peter sadly stopped doing this, because we know later he will betray Jesus, even though he swears he won't. He says, "I would never betray you. I would never say I don't know you." And yet we know he goes on to do this. And he stumbled into betrayal because he became complacent. Peter thought he knew what was in his heart and that he was right with God and strong in his faith. So he stopped asking, "Am I the one, Lord?" And he started saying, "Not me." So the idea here is kind of to be constantly checking your heart, constantly giving yourself a little checkup. I think probably daily would be great, but as much as we can manage to really bring this before the Lord and asking, am I right in my thinking in this? Am I loving these people the way I'm supposed to be? Is my attitude where it's supposed to be? I did some volunteer work last week with varying degrees of success. I think I talked about in a different podcast that I struggle with being inconvenienced. And if I volunteer to do something and I show up and there's too many people and there's not enough work, I kind of get this attitude of, well, I'm really busy and I don't need to be here, instead of having an attitude of humility and being like, yes, I will be extra hands, or maybe I'm here for a different reason. I do not go there. I'm not checking my heart as I should be. And I repeated the same exact thing I told you guys on the podcast. Like, you would think, because I just talked about it, that I would be on guard for it. But I was not asking the question of, where's my heart in this? I was once again inconvenienced and let some ugliness come out of my heart, instead of just being like, all right, great, I'm here, I'll do something. I was flustered and a little upset, and I had to kind of come back from it. And the Lord worked on my humility during these volunteer times. And I do see the purpose he had for me to be there. And it may have not been to do this exact work that I signed up for. I think it was something else, but I was very busy feeling inconvenienced. So I kind of missed out on it. I just think, how often do we see that and we have to replay these situations again? And I do think I caught it quicker. I think I kind of right away was like, oh yeah, I see what's happening here. God, you're giving me the same scenario again to see if I've learned, and I haven't. And so I had to do some reflecting and thinking on my heart, and hopefully next time I will be better. And we all know Peter goes on to be used so mightily by God. He has such a strong ministry. And yet he went through this time of not examining his heart, not really understanding what was in his heart. And then when he was put in a situation where Jesus had been taken prisoner and people were saying to him, "Oh, aren't you with Jesus?" And he was like, "Oh, no, I'm not," out of fear and shame. He did not act the way he thought he would. And I did not act the way I thought I would when I was inconvenienced, when I thought, well, okay, this is just, I'm here to volunteer and that's what it is. And instead I was a little bit annoyed and I had to immediately repent and be like, nope, you don't get to be annoyed. That is not a feeling you get to have right now. And why don't you look for places you can serve others? I think I kind of made a comeback like Peter, but how often are we just repeating these situations because we're not letting God really work that stuff out of our heart and just putting others first? Just like Cain is his brother's keeper. We are our brother's keeper. And sometimes we play different roles than we want to play. And someone said this week, this was at this volunteer thing, and it really struck me. She was kind of making an announcement to all the volunteers. And she said, maybe some of you are in a role you're not comfortable with here. Maybe you're used to being a leader and you're not leading. Maybe you're used to, being in charge and you're not in charge. Or maybe you're used to being behind the scenes and you're in the front. Whatever that is, you're being maybe put in a different role than you want or you would naturally fall into. And God has such work for us in those places, where we're like, oh, I actually think I could do this better, but I'm not in a leadership role. I am in a role where I'm going to follow, and there's something for us in that. Or I'm going to be put in a place where eyes are on me and people are watching me and I can't hide in the back. And that's really uncomfortable for me. And that growing in these spaces, I think, is a way God sometimes cleans stuff out of our heart. Sometimes we need pride cleared out. Sometimes we need like a shyness or not wanting to be bold for God, but we want to kind of hide away. Sometimes we need that cleared out, and God will use these different situations. He certainly knew Peter would betray him, and he let him walk through that trial. And I believe that trial strengthened Peter. He had experienced what that felt like, and he didn't want to do it again. And, he goes on to be martyred, which shows you he went from where he couldn't even admit to I think it was like a young girl was one of the first people that said something to him, couldn't even admit to her that he was with Jesus, and then later would go on to die for Jesus, which just shows you how much God works in our heart, how much he changes us. So whatever you're struggling with right now, God can change that. God can work on that and move in that. If you let him examine your heart, if you ask the dangerous questions, like she's saying in this book. I started a new devotional book. You'll remember the one I did that I finished up last time and I was a little bit sad about was starting today, which is by 1 Minute Bible Studies. And it's like 90 days of, whatever the topic is. And they have these different topics. And I chose my next one as being Christian classics. And I thought, oh, I certainly love classics. So I'm going to really enjoy reading about these classics. I'm sorry, there's Scout barking, of course, so distracting, but he has things to say. So I started this book and it was a little bit of a slow start for me, but now I'm really liking it. I'm like maybe 15 days in, and before I was like, I don't know if I'm going to talk about this book. I don't know that I would recommend it, but it is really picking up. And now I think I would recommend it. In one of them that I want to talk about, the title is called Always on Time. And these are different authors in here. So each day is a different author. So there isn't like one person to credit with for this book. But he talks about how we can love here. You can learn what to expect from people who are always running late. Well, this really resonated with me. I am forever always running late. I assume when we set up a time, that is just sort of like a loose goal. Like, oh, let's meet at 1 o'clock. I'll text you at 1 o'clock and tell you I haven't left yet. And luckily for me, the majority of my friends, we all work this way. So this really works well in my culture. I have one friend, though, who is always 5 minutes early to everything. And I have texted her and been like, hey, I haven't left yet. And she's like, oh, I'm here. And I'm like, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. You are an on-time person. So I think she might be like, yeah, this is you. I have learned that I cannot trust you to be on time. But kind of the point he's making is that even though when someone's late a lot and we expect them to be late, we do expect them to eventually show up. And that is true. Even though I might be 15 to 20 minutes late, I will eventually show up. Like, I will not probably leave you sitting at the coffee shop or the park or, wherever we're meeting. I'm not just going to be like, oh, I'm not coming. I will come. I will just be late. And so the point he's making is we can trust these people who are late to eventually get there. They'll eventually show up. And if we can trust that, how much more can we trust God, who's always on time? He says, but if we can learn to trust in people who are never on time, why is it so hard to trust God, who's always on time? And this just really struck me. And I was thinking about, what was happening with Peter. And he's, at the Last Supper, he's like, is it me, God? And he's examining his heart the way he should. And then later, so quickly later, he is not examining his heart the way he should. And he is late to claim Christ at this time. He's giving 3 opportunities to say that he is with Christ, even though he's been arrested and things are scary and things are weird and things are sad. He's been given 3 opportunities to still stand by him, and he chooses not to, but he gets there eventually. And I really resonate with this. I might be late, but I will get there. And I might be late to meet you, but I will show up. And I might be late with asking forgiveness or going to God in prayer when I'm fearful or asking God to deal with a sin in my life. But I do want to get there. And I do think through reading the word, through prayer, through being in Christian community, we will get there. And sometimes the people that are 5 minutes early to things, like my friend, and sometimes we're the people that are 15 to 20 minutes late. But we all get there. If we keep moving forward, if we keep growing, we're going to get there. Peter got there. He got to a place in his life where he was so powerful for the gospel that he stood against death. He stood against death. He wouldn't even stand against these random people that were asking him if he was with Christ. And then in the end, he gets to a place where he is willing to die. And, where are we in some of these places of our heart? And you might think I'm a good hour late. I'm late to this thing, but you will get there. Keep moving forward. Keep reading your Bible. Keep praying. Keep asking God to examine your heart, to help you grow. Get involved in some sort of Christian community. Do a Bible study. Join a church. Do volunteer work at a ministry. Apparently that really brings it out in me. I really am oh, there's a lot to work on. I am showing up late to this, but I want to get there. And I want to get to the point where I can be a really good volunteer and I can just show up and be like, whatever you need, I'll just hang out here. This is great. This is what I'm doing. Don't get discouraged. Peter, he betrayed Christ, but he got there. And I just really liked what she was saying in the book and how this tied on in with God being the one that's on time. And the classic person that they bring out in this is Samuel Logan Benge, I'm going to say, and he is from 1860 to 1936, and he served in the Salvation Army. And he kind of talks about time and not being on time for things. He says, God's department is abundantly full and runs on scheduled time, but the worried and anxious unbeliever wants him to run ahead of scheduled time. No, he may, in order to test and strengthen faith, not provide the second suit until the first one is ready to be laid aside. And sometimes after supper, he may allow you to go to bed, not knowing where the breakfast is to come from, but it will come at breakfast time. He knows that you have need of these things, so trust him, as does the sparrow. The wee thing tucks its tiny head under its little wing and sleeps, not knowing where it will find its breakfast. And when the day dawns, it chirps its merry note of praise. I loved that word picture. I mean, I can just picture a little duck, a little baby duck, just tucking his little beak under his wing and going to sleep, knowing he will find breakfast in the morning. And how often are we worried about whatever. Maybe it's not our physical needs, but maybe it is. Maybe it's health. Maybe it's finances. Maybe it's work. Maybe there's family conflict. Maybe there's conflict in your church. Maybe there's conflict in your heart. And we go to bed not knowing how these things are going to resolve. I mean, so often we do that. And do we trust God to be on time with these things? Do we trust that God will show up with the right people, the right thing, the right teaching, maybe listening to, the right podcast, or, reading the right book, and something will just trigger that thought and you'll think, oh, okay, here's the timing. Here's this thing starting to play out. I didn't know how God was going to work it out. And now I see him working it out in his own time, which is on time. We run late. He never runs late. And I really liked that picture he had of the little, he calls it the wee thing, this little thing tucking its head and just going to sleep. And can we do that at night? Can we just say, okay, I don't know how these problems are going to be fixed. I don't know how to fix this thing in my heart or in my life, but I believe you will show up on time with this, God. And this guy, Samuel Logan Benge, like I said, he served in the Salvation Army. And I thought this was kind of interesting about his life. He was told by one of the founders, which is William Booth, he had admonished Samuel and told him to seek another ministry, convinced he could never submit to this discipline. But while cleaning boots in a dingy cellar, Benge had a chance to assess whether he was wasting his talents and was quickened by the thought of Christ washing the disciples' feet. That experience put a key in my hand to unlock the hearts of lowly people all around the world for the next 40 years. Well, I think you can see how all of this ties in. First of all, here's the washing of the feet, the Last Supper again. There's so much happening there, so many pictures of what we are to do and who we are to be as we are sanctified in our Christian walk. But also, it spoke to me, and should I just not volunteer for things anymore because I'm maybe a bad volunteer? Or can I get work done during this time? So apparently he went down in the cellar and was cleaning boots and, felt like, oh, this is like Christ washing the feet. And maybe I can show up to volunteer work and there really isn't work for me. And there's something else I'm supposed to do there. And it isn't that thing, but there's something else. Like I'm supposed to encourage somebody or just be a smiling face or just be willing to give my time and not be put off or annoyed that maybe I was an extra person or I wasn't necessary. And, oh, could it be that maybe the Lord is disciplining me? And where is he doing that in your life? Where are these things that keep happening and you're like, why is this happening again? Is God putting something before you and saying, hey, there's a lesson in here for you. There's something I'm trying to work out in your heart. And if you would just get down here and clean these boots in the cellar like this guy did, or wash these feet, you could learn something really valuable and I can use you. And this guy went on to work for 40 years in the Salvation Army after this guy told him he probably should find a different ministry. Like, you're not working out. And he humbled himself and got to a place where he was useful. And we've been also talking about this other book, Finding Peace Through Humility, which is by Joel Muddamel, I don't know, Muddamalle. Sorry, I'm saying it so wrong, Joel. And it's finding peace through humility. And this has been such a theme just with all these books, with all these thoughts, is being humble and being like, you know what? I am not at fault in this situation, or I can be inconvenienced, or I can do this job I didn't want to do, or I can raise these kids in a way I didn't want to, or, wherever it is that we have pride and we look and we think, well, I wanted my life to look like this. I wanted my ministry to look like this. I want to use my time in this way. And God has a different thing there that we have to humble ourselves under. And so much of it is just God first and then others. So I started another new book. I really enjoy reading books about missionaries, and I've been reading this series, which is called Christian Heroes Then and Now, and they are by Janet and Geoff Benge, Benge. So it turns out I'm really bad at pronouncing last names, so that's unfortunate for this podcast because I'm doing it a lot. And I've read a few of these and we've talked about them, and I started a new one. A friend at church actually had a bunch of these, and she sent me a picture of all of them and said I could pick whichever one I wanted to read next. And I was really excited because I didn't know where to find these books. So I just randomly picked Rachel Saint. I've never heard of her. The subtitle is A Star in the Jungle. And I believe this takes place in like the 1940s. Probably. She died in 94. She's born in 1914. So her work was probably being done, around the 40s. And she goes into the jungles of Ecuador, and she actually works with some very violent tribes. They were cannibals or headhunters. These tribes were killing each other and fighting. And she really had a heart to bring the gospel into these different tribes, and people warned her against it quite a bit. They're like, no, they'll kill you. They're very violent and they don't like strangers. And she just felt like God had called her to do this, and she was going to do it no matter what, which is wild. And we're not even to that part yet in the book. But her background is sort of interesting to me. A very wealthy woman kind of took a shine to her and took her under her wing. And she took her on this big trip to Europe, and she traveled kind of all over and had the best of the best situation. And at first she loved it. She was like a teenager, and she was like, yeah, this is great. Like, we're eating at the best restaurants and we are doing all the best things. And it was really fun. And after a while, it started to lose its luster for her. And she started to question if this was really how God wanted her to spend her life, just, eating at the best restaurants and staying in the best rooms and traveling. And this woman who had no children comes to her and says, I would like you to be my companion, and then I will leave you my fortune. So she basically offered her the world. She offered her everything the world has. And so as a teenager, Rachel had to decide, do I want to become this woman's companion, live in luxury, and then inherit all this money? Or am I called to something else? And she really felt that she was called to go into the jungles of Ecuador and serve and just bring the gospel, love these people, and serve these people that had not been reached yet. And she really just felt like that was her calling. So she says no to this luxury and instead chooses what many would say is a very difficult life. She ends up working in a halfway house with men who are alcoholics. And she does it for such a long time that people actually say to her, this is just what you're going to do forever. You've been doing this for, I can't remember how many years it is, if it's like 20 years. But she does it for such a long time that everyone just assumes this is what she's going to do. This is her ministry. She's going to work in this halfway house, and she's going to work with these men who are recovering alcoholics. And yet she felt like she was supposed to go to Ecuador. She felt like she was supposed to work with these tribes. And nobody could make sense of that. Like, that does not make sense. Why would you do that? And this opportunity comes along to learn linguistics, which is something she's interested in. And she decides she wants to translate a Bible into their native languages of these different tribes, in Ecuador and in around that area. And there's a group of people that are working on that, and they're going and living with the tribes and learning their language so they can translate a Bible for them. And she decides to do this, and she just goes off into the jungles, and she goes to something called jungle camp, where they learn how to survive, and it's very primitive and it's very rough. We actually recently had a missionary come speak at our church, and I remember how he put this was very interesting. And I want to say it was in Ecuador. It's parts of where where his mission goes. And he was talking about how these people go out and they live, and he called it living on the edge of the world. It's so primitive. There's nothing there. And that's now, like, that's current day. And yet I think of her back in probably the 40s and the 50s, and she was living in this jungle life where they had to work for their survival, and they had to learn to survive because they had to be self-sufficient while learning linguistics. And what really struck me is when she was in the linguistics school is just how much you had to learn about the culture and their syntax and the way they link words together, and how crucial it is to understand somebody in their culture and the way they word things and the way they learn and the way they think and they process, to be able to bring them the gospel and to bring them God's love and to show that to them. You have to learn their culture and their language first. And sure, we may not be called to learn a foreign language and translate it into a Bible, but we are called to the people around us, and the people around us come from a different culture. We're all raised in our little family cultures. We're all raised in different parts of town and we come from different areas, and they do things differently, right? I mean, if you just look at the United States, if you think of how different the East Coast is from the West Coast, or the South is from the North, it's a completely different culture. And the things we value are different, and the things that we consider rude in one culture might not be in another, or the way we would put something might mean something to one person and not another. And so when we're ministering to somebody and we're discipling or mentoring or working with somebody, it's so important that we learn them. We learn their culture. And it may just be their home life, might be a better word for that. We learn their home life. We understand who their parents were, who their spouse is, how they talk to each other, what they value, what they don't value. And in many cases, those things are upside down and they need to be fixed and changed. But in other ways, it's just preference. It's just when I think of how different churches worship God and look and sound, and it's so different, and God is so varied and creative and artistic, and it's not wrong that our churches look so different. It's just a different expression. But sometimes there are things that are wrong that need to be corrected. But often it's just, this is how we like to dress for church. This is how we like to sing and do praise. This is how we do Bible study. And learning how somebody does that gives you, a place to step into their culture, which is what she's doing. She's going to step into their culture and learn them and love them and bring them the gospel. And it just made me think about it in our own life. And even this one particular tribe she was working with, they were attacked by another tribe, and the women and children had to flee for their lives. And some of these missionaries were helping them get to safety. And one of the girls that Rachel ends up working with, she can't find her mother, and she's talking about she can't find her mother, and she doesn't know if her mother was murdered or not. And they're traveling by canoe to try to escape. And they see some footprints on the side of the river. And the girl says, "Oh, my mother's alive. There's her footprints." And to Rachel, this is so wild. How could you know? I mean, they're just footprints. It could be anybody. And she explains that they know within her tribe, they recognize each other's footprints. They study them and they know them. And I think that is often how we are to be in our own ministry and mentoring and just spending time with the people God has put in our life. Do we know their footprints? Do we recognize them? Can we say, this is something they would like. This is something they wouldn't like. You know what? I should talk to them sweetly about this. Or you know what? They need to hear it in a bold way or they'll never hear it. And just learning to have that individual ministry towards people. I just felt like that really came out in this book about Rachel Saint, and it's very applicable to how we minister today. I told you last time that I would talk about a classic that I read in one day. Now, this is an abridged classic, clearly, and I wanted to talk about that. And it kind of pulls into a lot of the stuff we're talking about today. But this set of books is called Classic Starts, and I do really recommend these. They're children's books, so these aren't even teens, they're children's. That's why I read it in kind of one sitting. I enjoyed it. It's very pared down. I want to read the real copy. But if you have children that you want to read some book classics to out loud, I do recommend this Classic Starts. Or if you just don't have a lot of time, if you're like, I can't sit down and read a whole classic, but I would like to know some of these storylines, this is another great option. I think we've talked about that with some of the other classics I've done on the podcast, abridged or like books for children or teens are a great way to read some of these classics, especially because some of them are difficult. Talk about a different language, talk about a different culture. Going back and reading these authors who lived hundreds of years ago in some cases, it can be hard and challenging. I remember reading Shakespeare and it being so difficult for me until I took a Shakespeare class. And, I remember the first one we read was so difficult, but after a while, you begin to understand it. Just like when you go into a different culture or even a different family, just going into someone else's family, like when you get married and you join someone else's family and you're like, this is so different. You learn to assimilate to them. Scout, who I'm sure you can hear barking in the back, has not assimilated to our family. He has stayed true to self and will always be who he is. And he does not care about anyone else's culture or if they're recording a podcast right now. He does not care. But other people might try to, assimilate a little bit into a different family, into a different culture. If you've moved somewhere and you're like, oh, this is a completely different quote unquote culture here, like what they do, where they go, the things they care about. In my little town, for instance, things close up at night. Everybody goes home. It's kind of a family town. It's quiet. It's a cute little idyllic beach town, but it really shuts down at night. It is not a party town, as some would say. And I notice people that come into my town will comment on that. They're like, oh, this place is like shut down. And often we like to go to, there's this little art place called Crazzle Art, and they do a big art fair. And anyways, they have this lovely yard, and I love to go there with friends, and the kids play around in the grass, and there's little tables, and you can sit and talk, and it's well lit, and it's well lit in my world, which means there's lovely dim lighting. But it's just a really nice place to hang out. And I take friends there quite a bit, and we hang out there. And it's always interesting how they're like, oh, this town is shut down. Like nobody's doing anything anymore. And it's just the culture of this town, right? And if you go to a different town, there would still be a lot happening at 10, 11 o'clock at night. There'd still be people walking around. There'd be people out. It's just a different culture. So sometimes reading these classics is like stepping into a different culture. Oh, what time do we go to bed? When do we eat? What do we eat? What are these different things? And so a nice introduction can sort of be these young classic starts. So I read The Last of the Mohicans. Now, this was my favorite movie as a teenager, my absolute favorite movie. The soundtrack is still one of my favorite soundtracks. Disclaimer, I'm not recommending you watch the movie. And when I watched it, when I was probably like 14 or something, it came on TV, which meant it was edited. So I watched the TV version, which will mean nothing to young people today because you stream it. But I watched it on TV and it was edited. So I am not recommending you watch it, but it was my favorite movie and I've never read the book and I wanted to. And we actually took a trip to Cooperstown. I think that's what it's called. We took a little trip out east and my husband wanted to stop in, I think it's Cooperstown or it's Coopersville. I can't remember. He would be so disappointed because, here's why. Because apparently the Baseball Hall of Fame is there. And I was not excited about this like couple hour detour on our trip to go to the Baseball Hall of Fame, as you can imagine. But I was completely surprised and I loved it so much and I recommend it. And it is also the home of James Fenimore Cooper, who of course wrote The Last of the Mohicans. And it's a very colonial town. Apparently like baseball was invented there. So I love that because I love everything vintage. And we went to the little baseball place and we stayed at a really old like 1920s hotel that was on one of the lakes that James Fenimore Cooper talks about in his book. It was wonderful. I absolutely loved it. I would go back in a second. So anyways, I have been to James Fenimore Cooper's hometown. I've seen the statues. I've read the plaques. I've seen and walked about in some of the places he writes about. So he is even more dear to my heart. But his books aren't necessarily the easiest to read. So, but what I pulled out of The Last of the Mohicans is this. I'll give you a little synopsis. So this is the French and Indian War, colonial days. There is a British officer. Okay, so I'm checking my facts. So it says that this story takes place in the third year of the last war between the French and the English. And they were fighting over the countries or the land that would become Canada and the United States. So here's kind of your setting. And this British officer has two daughters, Cora and Alice, and he is sending them back to England. They're losing the war, and he's going to send these daughters back. And he puts them in the hands of Duncan, one of his officers, and it's his job to get them safely to the ship. And of course, all this peril happens on the way. And they get attacked by the French, they get attacked by Indians, all these things are happening. And they come across the last of the Mohicans, which are a father and son, and they're the last of the Mohican tribe, and they have a friend who's named Hawkeye. And so it's these three men kind of come across this officer and these two daughters, the two officers' daughters, and they're being attacked and they're kind of running for their lives. And these people all kind of meet out in the wild. And what really struck me in this book is that talk about being my brother's keeper. These people took this to the 10th degree. Here's these two Mohican Indians, and he calls them his adopted son, Hawkeye. So there's these three men. And they find these women and this other officer, and there's another man traveling with them in trouble. And they immediately help them, and they put their lives at danger because, and they keep saying this, because it's the right thing to do. I can't remember the names of the two Mohicans, but the father, he keeps saying, no, we will do what's right. And what is right is to protect you and help you. And even many, they're captured and they're hiding and all these things happen. And one of the daughters, the older daughter, says to these men at one point, she says, go save yourselves. There's only like 7 of us. We cannot fight off these Indian tribes and the French. Like, this is impossible. We cannot do this. We're going to be killed or taken captive. And there's no point in you being killed and taken captive with us. You guys can get out of here and you can save yourselves and you should go. And she kind of fights with them to get them to go. And that is when they say, no, that is the wrong thing to do. We will not abandon you. We will stay and we will help you. And they forge this like very quick and fast friendship, particularly between the men, like this officer and the Mohicans. They are saving each other's lives on and off throughout the story. And it just bonds them in this way that you're like, didn't you guys like just meet yesterday and you're already like willing to die for each other? And that is what struck me throughout the story, was how they were their brother's keepers. These characters in this book, the last of the Mohicans and the English officer and these girls, they were all willing to die for each other. It was like they had no basis to do this. They were not linked through war. They were not linked through a country. They were not linked through a people group. Like, they're coming from all different parts of life and cultures in the world. They have different goals. They really don't have a lot of overlaps. And yet they all care about each other and want to fight for each other. And they want the other person to save themselves. And they're like, no, we will not. We will help you and we will save you. And they continue to risk their lives to help each other. And that was really what stuck out to me in this little child's reader, was how these people were willing to help each other. And yet, we're not maybe facing war in jungles and people trying to murder us in the wilderness. But yet, some of us, who shall be unnamed, don't like to be inconvenienced, for crying out loud. Talk about being inconvenienced. The Mohicans and Hawkeye were just going about their lives, and then they start fighting off the French to save these 3 random people they just met. I mean, talk about being inconvenienced. And it just felt like a lesson to, what am I willing to do? We were actually talking about what is hospitality in my Bible study, where we just read 1 Peter, which goes along so perfectly with all of this. And it's a lot about suffering and why we suffer, but being willing to do it unto the Lord and being hospitable to others. And what does that look like? And we kind of talked about it looking often very inconvenient. Like, it's one thing if you're planning to have guests over and you're going to have a dinner party, and that's a different story. But it's more like, yeah, if somebody gets stuck somewhere and they need help, are you going to go get them? Or somebody, their power goes out at their house and they need to come over and take a shower and stay the night. Are you going to let them? It's real inconvenient. It's not what you planned on. You don't have enough food. You don't have enough clean towels. You would have cleaned your house. You were going to go to bed early. All these things that I kind of struggle with in my heart, and you guys maybe don't. Maybe you're like, oh yes, just come on in. We'll figure it out. Or I'm more like, oh, I don't know. We don't have enough, or I wasn't planning on this. And Yeah, I look at the last of the Mohicans and how they were so willing to travel with these people, even though they were going into danger. Are we willing to take people in when it's inconvenient, when it will cost us? It's one thing when we budget for a dinner party or we budget for guests to come over and we're like, yes, I washed these sheets and I bought extra food and here's what we're going to do. And it's a whole nother story when you didn't plan on it. And you're like, oh, okay, I had things I was going to do. I had an agenda. I had a plan. I wasn't really ready to take people in. And I think some people do this naturally and beautifully. And other people like me do not. It's harder for me. I would love to meet you for coffee and talk about the Bible, and I will pray for you, and you can call me in a crisis and I will probably drop everything and talk to you and listen to you. But if you were like, I need to come live with you, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, that's tricky. My house is really little. So it's wherever, our inconveniences, and yours might be the opposite. You might be like, yes, get in here. I will make some food. I will put you in a bed, but let's not talk about anything hard because that's where I don't know what to do. So we all have our different gifts. And like we were talking about earlier, sometimes we're put in roles that we don't like, and God is stretching us and cleaning things out of our heart, just like he did Peter, where he knew he would betray him, but he knew he would come back stronger. So where in your life are you maybe struggling, or you're working through something, and maybe you're like, I think I failed. I think I let God down in this place, or I think I let this person down, or I did not stand up the way I should have, or I wasn't as sweet as I should have been, or I wasn't as loving, or I didn't give up my time, and whatever it is. But yet you can come back stronger. Yet God can take those situations and make them even stronger. And maybe a place that you're really weak is where God wants to be really strong through you, to encourage others, to be an example, to be an ambassador of what it looks like to be a Christian. It is often inconvenient. It often costs us. It is death to self. And it is hard to love people that are hard. And it's hard to make time for people. And it's hard to sit with people through their crises, and it's hard to sit with people through their joys, right? It's hard to not be jealous. It's hard to not be envious. It's hard to put others first. And I think when we're in the Word and we're being fed, and even just reading through First Peter has just fed my soul. I suggest you do it. You could sit and read it in one sitting, and it just was so much was being pointed out to me. I've read it many, many times before, but this time it really struck me. I think because of these other books I'm reading, that I'm like, oh yeah, this is where they're drawing this from. We are to put others first, but God does not leave us on our own. He is with us. And you might be late to the game in some areas, but God is always on time. Thank you for listening today, and I'm going to keep reading, and I look forward to sharing with you the books I'm reading. And I love it when you send me pictures of what you're reading. I love it when you interact with me on social media. It means so much. Your encouragement. I think some of you in particular, God has really used you to encourage me in this podcast. And I thank you for that. Thank you for people that pray for me and share it and just tell me that it means something. That means a lot to me. And I also pray for you guys, my listeners. So until next time, thank you. I'm so glad you joined me today on the French Press. If you liked what you heard, you should follow me. That way you'll get all the latest episodes. And if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to rate the show. Also, if you'd like to follow my blog, The Demi-Tasse Drafts, I have a link below in the show notes. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Anytime you can leave a like, comment, reshare a post. All these help my ministry get more traction. The most important thing you can do is pray. I really appreciate all of your support. Thank you for sharing a French press with me today.